Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with SAG-AFTRA Foundation, and thank you so much for joining us to watch another one of our Conversations at Home videos today. Before we jump into today's conversation, I want to continue reminding everyone watching these videos that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation is continuing to raise money for our COVID-19 Emergency Assistance Fund. We are using this money and giving grants and donations to SAG-AFTRA members who are currently out of work with all of the film and television productions being closed right now to help them with paying basic bills, buying groceries, paying rent, mortgages, whatever it is that they need to get by day to day at the moment. So please check out the details below this video and consider supporting if you're able to in any way. Today we're so fortunate to be joined by the fantastic Azaria to talk about BROCKMIRE. I wanted to start by asking you, this final season, is obviously about the world being in a very different place. It's set a few years in the future where, the world is kind of coming to an end almost, and there's a very serendipitous feel to the timing that it was released. Have you found that there's all of a sudden a new and different, unique connection with audiences than you'd originally anticipated from the season?
Well, I guess I hope so. We didn't intend that. And unfortunately, the 10 years, 12 years into the future that we projected, this sort of semi-apocalyptic reality is a little closer to home than we'd hoped. But with pandemics, and there's this first 5 minutes of episode 1 where you kind of get this fake Today Show opening, where you're talking about pandemics and riots and the heat and baseball being dead, and it's really we certainly never anticipated that there'd be more baseball in the show, where it's basically dying, than there is in reality when the show is released in 2020. But yeah, we were kind of precognitive in a very strange way.
Yeah, it's interesting how this current situation has made everyone watch things in a very different way. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the original genesis of the show, because, it came off the back of that great sketch that you did with Funny or Die, and then ended up being developed into a series. Originally, the plan was for a movie, and then funding fell through at the last minute. And you ended up working with Joel Church Cooper on developing it into a TV show. And I love the fact that you took this moment that was just a momentary sketch that you were doing online that then turned into this amazing character arc over these 4 seasons, and, was just interested in terms of working as an actor. You can never really predict where opportunities can come from and what's going to really become something, what's going to move forward. You can't really plan more than a week at a time, I imagine. And so I was interested in the way that this experience in particular, with the journey that the show took, has really taught you to just lean into things coming from unexpected places, and if it's kind of opened you up to thinking about things differently at all moving forward.
Yeah, this show, it took a long time, as you just laid out there, to create itself. On the one end, it was a character and a voice I'd been doing since I was a teenager, and had tried to figure out many different scripts and lives for it, never could. And then, it's this one of these rare moments, on the one hand, where things just work out perfectly, meaning I walked into my agent's office, which usually good celebrity, good show business stories don't start that way. So I walked into my agent's office and we made a plan. But my agent even said, well, because I had all these characters, and I felt would have been right for Saturday Night Live, but I was like, I'm not going to go on Saturday Night Live now. I'm kind of old now. So where am I going to take this? And he said, well, Funny or Die. Will Ferrell and Adam McCabe again. Funny or Die is a website to accommodate things like this. And my agent even said, who knows, maybe you do a funny character, maybe it turns into a TV show or a movie one day. And it actually did. Now, that said, that took like 10 years to enact. And as you said, a movie script that we were in pre-production for that movie down in Baton Rouge. We were 5 weeks in. We were $600,000 in the hole. And then we lost financing 4 days before shooting. And Funny or Die, they stuck with it. We within a year we reconfigured it. And as you say, Joel Church Cooper, who was another part of this. I kind of knew how to make this character funny and raunchy and kind of silly, like a sketch. And Joel really saw in it a lot of depth and humanity and dark truth. And Joel was a young writer, still is, but it was his first. He hadn't showrun yet. He hadn't been head writer yet. He got a break with this, and to my great good fortune, he really he's a great writer. And so I was lucky enough to be the right place at the right time, which is another rare thing in show business. So it was a lot of luck and a lot of persistence together, which I guess is almost every showbiz story, really.
Yeah, no, he's done such an amazing job in the way that he's crafted it out and taken it to a place that you never would expect. And I was interested in the way that you filmed the show, because when you were doing the first season, it sounds like it was an incredibly rushed experience, because you had these 35-page scripts. And didn't you film the whole season in something like 22 days?
Your math is exactly correct. We had scripts that were too long. We had learned to cut them down by about 10 pages and reduce locations too, because that's what really kills you. You can have a 10-page script, but if you need to be in 20 locations, that's going to burden production a lot.
Yeah. So how did that kind of fast pacing and having to make creative choices really, really quickly and just kind of find the comedic moment, the heart, the humanity within a scene in a very quick way with I imagine less time to kind of explore different possibilities and play around as much. How did that then kind of influence the way that you work on the show now at this point, having just done season 4, knowing the characters and having to just like have a real gut instinct with them?
Well, right from the beginning, we knew we had to do this really fast, so all the scripts had to be ready. I was off book. Actually, the season 1 I wasn't. I was off book on. I had all the dialogue memorized for the first 2 weeks of shooting, but then I was greatly suffering those next bunch of weekends trying to catch up, and realized after that I have to memorize the whole season like one would a long play. Otherwise, we were never going to get it all shot. And you have to have, it all has to be planned within an inch of its life. Every location, we do what's called block and shooting, where it's like a movie where you shoot locations out as you go, as opposed to going in order. So it means your director has to know, no, this is scene 4 of episode 6, and now we're going to shoot scene 2 of episode 3. And it gets a little confusing. It's another reason why I needed to memorize all of it. It helps that I was producer as well. And by the end, we kind of had it down, running like clockwork. But it was really a challenge. I couldn't even believe we did it the first season. I was fully expecting us not to. I was amazed we got it all shot. And then I was completely shocked after we cut them all together. I'm like, I think this is actually good. I actually sent it to people like, is this good? Am I crazy, or is this actually pretty good? I couldn't believe we did it, frankly.
Yeah. And then obviously with this season jumping into the near future, I heard that there was a point that initially you had a little bit of reticence of making that time jump. And I was curious about the conversations that you had with Joel and kind of where he saw the vision for the show going in this way, and the point at which you started to really trust that was a great idea and a really interesting space to take this character into.
Well, Joel Church Cooper is an amazing writer. And I'd say season 1, as we were finding it, I'd have notes on scripts, but not all of them. And he turned in really great drafts. I was astonished. In season 2, I had even less notes. Season 3, barely any. Season 4, I swear to you, I think I said 2 things about 8 scripts. One was like, and then nothing. Like, maybe I should emphasize this word on this joke. And so he really just had the voice of this character and the world it was in. And he had always had all 4 seasons in his mind to begin with, the narrative. And that's another rare thing about a comedy like this. All I asked was that it be really funny and really believable in its way. And it was that. But Joel created this incredible love story, this incredible narrative. And then towards the end of season 3, he started really getting into social commentary. He kind of saw it as a way to kind of make some global societal statements. And I was kind of nervous about that, not because I didn't want to go there, but I just didn't want to take a left turn into being not funny. And so the last episode of season 3 was almost what I call the bonus track, where it was like, we sort of finished our narrative for this season, and now we're going to kind of take a step back and make a statement about society, if you will, American society. And so I was nervous about it. And Joel's first idea for it was quite radical and dark. And I was like, I don't think we can do that particular one. It involved a series of shootings. And I was like, dude, I don't know that I can be funny after that. I mean, I can see it being impactful. I can't see it being too funny. And so we sort of came up with a compromise, harsh reality that season was dealing with, that episode was dealing with. And to my surprise, it was very, very funny episode, really smart and touching and really funny. And then season 4, as you just mentioned, was sort of the whole season was kind of social commentary set 12 years in the future, kind of like, well, if we keep going as a society, here's where we're likely to end up. And because that episode 8 of season 3 had gone so well, I was like, okay. And I did question it a bunch. I was like, but all that means is, I said to Joel about 5 times, are you sure? Are you sure? Really sure that this is going to be funny? He's like, yes, 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 I got this. And I had learned a long time ago to let Joel follow his muse. And if he felt like it was going to be good, I was going to go with it. And sure enough, you know, it came out great.
It did. What was the difference in the way that you prepared for this season? Because obviously going into season 2 and season 3, you were in a place where you knew this character so well. You've gotten the opportunity to inhabit him and really live and breathe within him, and to kind of know what his choices would be and his responses to certain situations. But then obviously with this one, there's the unique thing of that massive time jump. So there's all this time in between. So how did that really shift your preparation process and the way that you were thinking about him as a character?
You know, it didn't, because here's the funny, there were sort of 2 linchpin moments along those lines creatively for me performing this character. I mean, it's a character I've done for so long that on one level it was second nature. I had, you know, so as far as the guy's cadence and timing and who he is and the sort of trappings of the character, I knew. Day 1 of shooting on season 1, Tim Kirkby was our director. Mo Marable directed the last 3 seasons, but Tim Kirkby, he's a wonderful British director, did the pilot of Fleabag and many, many other incredible things. My Mad Fat Diary is a great series in England he directed. And I did take 1 on day 1 with Amanda Peet, and I felt pretty good. And Tim came onto the set. He's like, mate, you got to understand, you know, it's serious pain here. You're in incredible pain in this character, and she's in tremendous pain, and it's dark, mate. Everyone's really upset underneath it all. I can never be left out of a moment of all of this. And I was like, my God, he's right. I swear to you, I didn't look at the script that way. I was just kind of making sure it was funny and making sure our production was ready. And then it really snuck up on me that it was quite emotional and dark, a lot of this stuff. And fortunately, I've had years of training as an actor, and I was able to kind of shift into that. But that kind of, I really never forgot that after that day. Like, I was like, I have to also make sure that emotionally this thing is resonating. So by the end, I'd say the other moment was, you know, I'm a sober guy. I haven't drank in about 14 years now. And it's just, I didn't intend this to be a story of sobriety. Joel Church Cooper took it that way. But as Jim got sober, as Brockmire got sober season 3, Joel asked me a lot about what that was like what was early sobriety like. In particular, the whole concept of a higher power, that's very big in 12-step programs. You have to find some personal connection to God, if you will. And Joel found that a very curious endeavor. And so he asked me a lot about my personal journey with that. And so that was probably the most that Joel ever leaned on me to kind of lend my personal voice and my personal experience to what Brockmire was experiencing. And that really teed us up for the last 2 seasons, though, is sort of that journey.
Yeah, and I think people often underestimate the technicality required and the skill set required to actually play drunk, which you had to do a monumental amount early on in the show. And I was curious if there was kind of like any techniques or anything that you did for yourself that helped get you into that space for your performance when you were having to do that so often.
You know, it's funny. I'm glad you asked good questions. I'm glad you asked that because, playing drunk is kind of challenging. And I found it really hard as a young actor. I never did it very well, I didn't think. And I think it's one of those practice makes perfect things. And not that I do it perfectly, but I noticed about 5 years ago, or before I was doing this character, that I've sort of got it down. I think I finally just found the right balance of slurring and a lot of it is sort of, I found playing drunk is committing emotionally, turning on a dime, like saying one line, you know, really amused and one line really sad and one line kind of deadpan and the next line really furious. And if you kind of make yourself real volatile and sort of throw in a sort of looseness to it, it sort of works. There's something about the Brockmire voice that also lends itself to kind of really sounding wasted when you want to. I don't know why that is. But yeah, so I don't know. Over the years, it's a skill I picked up, and it's fun. As Brockmire got sober in the series, I missed playing all drugged out and drunk. I really enjoyed it. I preferred crazy, drunken Brockmire to sober, responsible Brockmire.
Now that you say that, I feel like just hearing the accent makes it sound like he's got a scotch in his hand the way he talks.
He does have a smoky whiskey barrel voice, doesn't he?
Yeah. And one of the things I thought was interesting in the way that you've talked about your approach to comedy previously is that you don't try to find the comedy, and you don't try to find that kind of joke moment. And particularly with this character, because so many of the comedic moments really did end up coming from this vulnerability and this like raw emotional side of him. Were you just really focused on that side, and then the comedy just kind of like naturally flowed from that space? Or how did you think about it in terms of making sure that things still landed?
Well, it helps, again, to compliment Joel and all the writers. There were about 7 or 8 writers over the years who worked on the show. When the scripts are that good and tight and funny, you can sort of trust them to do the comedy heavy lifting. Like if you just kind of say the words and don't, well, sometimes you do slur them when you're wasted. But if you say them clear enough for people to understand, the humor is going to mostly take care of itself. And then, there's going to be a kind of fancy answer. I mean, to big time you, but I was fortunate enough to work with Jack Lemmon like 20 years ago on Tuesdays with Morrie. And I'm not an idiot, so I picked his brain a lot about acting while I had a captive audience there. And he shared a lot with me. I realized after that he was kind of at the end of his life, which we didn't realize when we were shooting it. But he was particularly feeling giving and generous and like he wanted to share his wisdom and knowledge at the time. And he talked a lot about how, as a young actor, his performances were really choreographed, and within an inch of their lives, he had worked them out. And the more he went along as an actor, the more that he loosened that up and just kind of showed up and listened as an actor and was just real honest and tried to connect with the person he was in the scene with. And I took that to heart. It was hard to do, but I realized he was probably right. And it took me about, I think, 10 years to get comfortable working that way more, because I was like him. I wasn't as good as he was, but I would plan everything out. And over the years, I've come to kind of just trust that something's going to work out if you kind of show up and are present, which is what they try to teach you in acting classes. It's very zen, you try to do all this work and technique, and so you can just let it all go and be present. And you know what it coincides with? I always have felt more comfortable doing a voice like Brockmire, or like Mo on The Simpsons, or whatever accent or voice I'm doing. As I got more comfortable working the way Jack Lemmon suggested, I got more comfortable just speaking in my own voice on camera as well, and not feeling like I had to, gussy things up with a vocal trick or anything.
Yeah. And, the way that you and Amanda Peet work together is so beautiful to watch. And there's so much craft to that chemistry, and the way that these two characters really, even when they're just firing off insults at each other, there's a real kind of connection that's happening between them at every single moment. At this point, was that something that just came very naturally, or was it something that you were cognizantly thinking about as you were shooting scenes together still?
Well, thank you. I'm glad you feel that way about our work together. And I think, what I just described, I think Amanda works that way too. So we're two actors who've, A, we really do like each other, and we're not faking that. B, not that that's necessary for good chemistry on screen. There's been many, that theory's been proved many times. But we do work similarly, like you just mentioned, where we try to be as real and as truthful as we can. And I'm also such a fan of her work, like literally, like I love her acting. So in the scene, I'm really engaged. Like I feel like I have the best seat in the house for a really great performance. And so I think that comes through. And she's also one of those actors, this is like the highest compliment I can pay, who I don't know she often fools me. Like I think she's breaking character. Like she'll laugh and I think she's laughing and she's like out of the scene, but she's laughing in character. I don't even realize. I'm like, oh my God, she's still acting. So I really have to be genuinely on my toes with her, she'll say she'll say a line, and I'll say, "What, Amanda?" She's like, "That's my line. I'm acting." I'm like, "Oh God, it was so convincing. I thought you were just talking to me." So, an actor who's that good, you pay attention to, and I think that comes through in our work together.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit as well about Brockmire's role as a father in this season, which was such an unexpected delight to watch him in that way. And I feel like he became a parent in a way that we wouldn't have necessarily anticipated, from previous seasons of the show. And, and how you and Joel kind of mapped out the way that he was kind of almost this overly feminist, like overly emotional parent, talking to his daughter about encouraging her to not shave her armpits, talking to her about tampons and diva cups and all of those things. And how did you really land on that as the decision, and then make sure that was the space that you were taking all your scenes into?
Oh, you really paid attention to this season, so thank you. By the way, I'm happy to answer your question, but speaking of paying attention to the season, I want to mention that I'm very awkward at promoting my own stuff, but I love this show so much. I honestly think it's so good, and it's we're a cult hit, which is code for a wonderful show that not enough people watch. So I want to urge everybody to take the BROCKMIRE challenge. If you're watching this, if you haven't seen the show, watch the first 5 minutes of episode 1, season 1. If you don't laugh out loud, you can stop. But I think you will, and if so, keep going. It's very bingeable. It's 8 episode seasons, 22 minutes an episode. That's one quarantine afternoon practically, and it's a really great narrative. And I think it's the thing I'm most proud of in my career. So please watch it. Now, that said, there's my awkward pitch, but it's heartfelt. What was the question?
It was really about his space as a father and the way that he's very, almost overly feminist and overly emotive with his daughter.
That's again Joel Church Cooper. See, Joel has this wisdom that's like beyond his years that I don't understand. And one of the things we talked about as BROCKMIRE being a recovering addict, recovering drunk, is that what often happens to addicts or drunks when they recover is they immediately become very codependent. I mean, if you have a sort of addictive filter through which you engage with the world, which really doesn't go away just because you stop drinking or stop drugging or whatever, you're going to obsess over whatever it is, whether it's, cupcakes, work, your children, whatever it is, you're going to switch it, video games, anything. And so, the motto of most addicts and drunks is if 1 is good, 11 is better. And that's certainly no different for BROCKMIRE. So it's not that he became a neglectful parent. He became an overly intense, obsessive parent, which is really right in line with being a drunk. It's just kind of the flip side of the same coin. And I didn't feed that to Joel. I don't know how he has this wisdom, but it was spot on, Because you see, even though it's the opposite of the way you'd think BROCKMIRE might behave, it seemed very in line with how he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously one of the other biggest plot points this season was kind of, as we get to those final episodes, his Parkinson's diagnosis. And you played it so tenderly. And I was interested if you kind of went off and did a lot of research and kind of really wanted to understand that, to make sure that even just the way that you were playing his hand tremor really came across as authentic in all of those moments. And also in understanding the emotional journey that would take this character on.
Well, you're going to make me cry, but, I've known some people who had it. They're close to me. My beloved shrink in particular, who thank goodness is still with us, but I've watched his hand, shake a bunch over the years, and I've had a few close relatives pass away from Parkinson's, and so I've gotten to observe it pretty close up over the years, both as an actor and as a person. And mark it in time, like, oh, I see it's gotten a little bit worse. So, I sort of know what that is. It's a real slow death sentence is what it is. And it's a tough one. And it wasn't my idea. Once again, it was Joel. But, that was sort of in keeping with BROCKMIRE, the spirit of BROCKMIRE, which is, there's such a yin and yang. Always, there's no good news without a real serious reminder of bad news, which is life, most of life, like we're living through right now. Although a lot of us are kind of searching to find what the good news is, but it's there if you look. And that's again, getting very philosophical here, but that's a lot of the journey of sobriety as well. That doesn't start as good news. You know, one hits a bottom, and you hope to God that that bottom doesn't involve your death or somebody else's. And there's a lot of bad things that can happen in a life lived that way, a life that is lived recklessly, you know, both physically and otherwise. And then you try to come out of those ashes, you try to rebuild. And what you find is there's many wonderful joys that come out of mostly being gratefulness, just for your everyday life to have it back. And that's a lot of Brockmire. It's like, boy, there's a lot of awfulness and a lot of gifts out of that awfulness.
Yeah, well, one of those gifts is that very final scene in the show when he's just like sitting there, taking in his love for baseball, surrounded by the people that he loves, that he has these beautifully complex relationships with. And you do it with such like an introspective quietness, which wasn't really the way that this character has existed, but it feels like such a payoff at the end. And I was interested in the way that you approached that scene and thought about it differently from all the other moments, because you're really capturing his entire history up to that point, just in that gentle quietness and the way that you just sit in the chair with those people around you.
Well, again, thank you for the nice compliment. And, you know, one of the things I love about Joel's writing and all the writers' writing is he'll very casually and offhandedly lay in where you're headed. And it can be just a joke or a sort of aside. It's very offhanded. And then it really sneaks up on you, the significance. And earlier in the season, we have a flashback of Brockmire talking to his daughter's mother, who he doesn't remember because it was a one-night stand in the middle of a blackout drunk in the Philippines. But he's describing baseball to her and how the game is even better with your eyes. It's the only sport that can actually get better with your eyes closed, the sounds and the smells and the crowd and the rhythm of it. And so on one hand, as a baseball man, you know, we began with Brockmire. Brockmire's a character who can't shut up, impulsively, compulsively, cannot shut his mouth. His job is to describe everything he sees. He does that whether he's sober or drunk, whether he's being paid to do it for a baseball game or elsewhere. When we first see him in that first 5 minutes I mentioned of episode 1, season 1, he's ruining his life by not being able to shut up in a blackout drunk and saying inappropriate things on the air. And this is a man who has finally learned the value of shutting his mouth and taking life in and appreciating it, even a baseball game, which is his job to describe. Even that is his real journey, his achievement in life is finding love and comfort within his own skin enough to just have the people he loves around him and shush. And, you know, that's what was designed. And I think it was pretty beautiful. And actually, you know, it's been a long journey. And really for me, I was really moved playing the scene, and I've come to love all those people who were sitting around me for real. And it was pretty easy to just be kind of filled with emotion, being quiet at the end of that.
Yeah, but that wasn't actually the last scene that you ended up filming. Your final scene that you shot, I think, was one of the ones with some of the team owners in those meetings. What was that atmosphere and environment on set when you were kind of capturing those final moments within this character?
You know, all that said about the show and how moved I was, I'm not a very sentimental guy about finishing a job. I always feel kind of relieved because it's a lot of hard work. And I really felt great about what we accomplished. And I kind of feel like we left it all out there on the playing field. And I really was present and enjoyed it all the way along. And this is a character I think will continue. We're putting together a Jim Brockmire podcast to kind of have more of frivolous fun with him, you know, doing sports takes of the weeks with guests and things like that. So I'm sure the character will continue. And, you know, I'm kind of excited to move on to the next thing. I mean, I really feel like we did it. So I was kind of happy to finish and get back to my family in New York, and, you know, life goes on.
Yeah. With as much as you're happy to kind of be finished and be stepping away and jumping into other projects, what's the thing that you're going to miss most about playing Brockmire on the show?
Definitely not wearing that polyester jacket, even though it was fun. It was a little hot and a little ugly. That's all my mother cares about, by the way, is what I'm wearing and how I appear. She's like, I saw the show. Very funny. Do you have to wear that fakakta jacket? I mean, is that necessary? That you should look like a shamil? That was her review of the show. But What do I miss? I think I'll miss, I don't know that I'll ever again feel this sense of like accomplishment, like a character from when I was 15 that for years to try to find the right place for it. And then, that first season that we finished, I felt like this is what bands must feel like when they somehow find the combination of the right, like I felt like, Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend, like this is how they must have felt. Like that's how I felt with Joel. Like our sum was greater than our parts. And it was weird the way we sort of combined to make this character better than we ever could have on our own. And a show that that was much better than we ever could have envisioned on our own. That I think I'll miss the most, the feeling of how exciting that was kind of every day to feel like we were creating something that was like lightening the bottle a bit.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you a couple of quick questions about your voiceover work, just because, one of the things that we do with actors as well is we have voiceover labs where people come in and record things, and we do a lot of workshops and classes. And, you're obviously one of the leading artists in that field with your experience over several years. And you were talking a little bit recently about how kind of over the years you've learned to really kind of take care of your vocal cords and think about that, even down to which character you're going to record first. And I was just interested in hearing a little bit more about that journey and how you figured out what really works for you in terms of making sure that you are kind of protecting your voice and protecting that tool to tell stories.
It's nothing fancy. I mean, I probably don't do enough. I mean, I'm sort of resistant to all that kind of breathing technique and the care one should take of their instrument, of their gift, if you will, as they would say it on Broadway. Really, for me, my voice actually tends to blow out rather easily. So voices that are hard to do, like Duffman, for example. Duffman is a lot on your voice. So if I have a Duffman, I'll just save that to the end, because 5 minutes of Duffman and I'll get kind of hoarse. So then I won't sound too good as, Wiggum, or Chalmers or comic book guy or whoever I'm doing in The Simpsons. So some of it's just as simple as that. Or if there's a lot of screaming to do, like even on BROCKMIRE, our days were we didn't have a lot of leeway. So if I had a scene where I had to scream, I would make sure to put that at the end of the day so that I wasn't blown out, for the other scenes I had to shoot. And even with that, some still I had to loop because my voice was so gone that I had to go back and just loop it because I kind of sounded like this by the end of the day. That's really about as fancy as I get about it. Tea with honey and lemon, I find it works rather nicely. But I've, on Broadway, it was a big problem for me on Broadway. The couple of times I did it, I would really kind of lose what I was doing. I'll tell you, those cortisone shots work. Not that you should do that a lot, but that's where they send you. If you sound like this and you got a show, you get a cortisone shot, and man, do they work. You can't sleep for about 72 hours as well. But it's dangerous to do that too, because then you kind of, it's like taking a shot, a painkiller, like in the NFL, like, well, my knee doesn't hurt, but you might be doing a lot more damage to it at the same time.
Yeah. And there's such a fascinating difference in terms of the way that you approach and the style of the craft of performing voiceover work versus having the physicality to embody with a character. Is there, do you kind of sit there and create any sort of space and are you quite a physical performer, or what are the differences for you in terms of how you set up that character and really capture moments and scenes?
Well, a lot of vocal characters, like for some reason, Chief Wiggum needs to come out of the side of my mouth. I don't know why. So if I were performing him on camera, he would talk, like this. And I'd probably have to do something about that because that's a little distracting. But a lot of times, physicality for me, because I'm so vocally oriented, physicality follows often my whole body will kind of follow the voice I'm doing and will fill in a lot of the character work. But you know what I learned from Dan Castellaneta and Harry Shearer in particular very early on? I started doing The Simpsons with them when I was 22, and they're fully committed. They're physically doing it. Like, even though they're just at a mic and we're just getting the voice, they're acting it 100%. And you kind of need that level of commitment to make a good vocal performance. If you kind of just figure, well, it's just my voice, I'll just kind of casually sit here and say the lines, that'll come through. It'll be boring. You need to commit fully.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking to us about that and talking so in depth about the show. And I hope that everyone watching this video, if they haven't already been obsessed with BROCKMIRE, will take your challenge and watch the first 5 minutes and fall in love with it. And thank you so much, Hank.
Thank you for having me. All 4 seasons on Hulu as we speak.